We can only imagine what life would be like for Adam and Eve before the fall. The church teaches that before the first sin, they had what we called preternatural gifts. That's kind of a big word. But they are basically special graces or privileges given to them by God. And there were three of them. It was infused knowledge, absence of concupiscence, and bodily immortality. And so if we lived before the fall, we would have special knowledge about God and his attributes, morality, and the material and spiritual universe. And then on top of that, we also wouldn't be drawn to sin as we are now, and we wouldn't die. I suppose in a word, we would be living a pretty good life. We'd be in right relationship with God, and we wouldn't be drawn away from him. But because of the fall, we struggle against temptation and sin. We're in a spiritual battle for our souls and the souls of others, which means at times we all struggle to do good. There was a heresy in the early church. It was called Pelagianism, and it basically denied original sin and the necessity of God's grace. According to this heresy, infant baptism, it wasn't necessary, and we could freely choose to do good and obey God's commandments without the need of supernatural grace. But experience tells us something different, that, as I said, there's a constant battle going on between the spirit and the flesh, that we do sin, and that the only relief we have and the hope to overcome our weaknesses is the mercy of God. St. Augustine, he'd say that we need God's grace to do any good. And I always tell people that God does 99% of the work and we do a little 1%. But that doesn't mean that 1% isn't important, because God gives the grace, but then we have to receive that grace and cooperate with him. St. Augustine, he also says that God created us without us, but he won't save us without us. And so we all have to do something on our part. And we get an idea of what we're called to do in our first reading. We hear from Moses. He's speaking to the Israelites, telling them to remain faithful to the covenant, to keep the commandments of God that are written in the book of the law. Well, the law and the prophets, they're summed up in the two great commandments, the love of God and the love of neighbor. And in our gospel, we see Jesus challenging a scholar of the law to not just know and be able to recite these commandments, but for that knowledge to translate into action. Now, the scholar, he probably should have stopped after his first question, but he wanted to justify himself. He probably thought he had it all figured out. He loved his fellow Jews, and so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus' response, it probably came as a shock to him. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, Jews and Samaritans, back then, they didn't have good relations with each other. Samaritans, they were considered partial Jews because they didn't observe the law to the full, and they were intermarried with the pagans. And now Jesus, he's telling this Jew to imitate the Samaritan, to be like the Samaritan. And what's even more, the man coming down from Jerusalem who was beaten and left for dead, it's most likely that he was a Jew. And so Jesus, by having the Samaritan minister to him, he's removing the boundaries of who we consider our neighbor. It's not just our friends or those who share our common values, but it's even those we disagree with and who are outside our circle of friends. Another way that we could look at this gospel today is to see Jesus as the Samaritan. We're the man beaten and left for dead in the street as a result of our sin. But Jesus, he comes from a distant place to show us mercy and bring us back to life. And his challenge for each of us today is to do the same, to show mercy to others as he shows mercy to us. We often hear in the news, especially since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that we live in a divided country. But the truth is, we have a divided world. There's a lot of things that divide us. It can be race, it can be certain ideologies, our religion, our sense of truth, politics, all those hot button issues of our day. But what can conquer all of this is love and mercy. Not that goofy, emotional feeling love or tolerant love where we tolerate everything and don't say anything, but true love for each person, seeing everyone as our neighbor and wanting what's best for them. St. Paul, he tells us in our second reading that Jesus is preeminent in all things. In him, the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. He's the head of the body, the church. And as our head and the perfect image of God, he teaches us how to love and show mercy to others. If you look at the stories of him interacting with the people in Scripture, for example, the adulterous woman, or all the blind, the crippled, and the lame who came to him, he loved every single one of them, and he took them where they were at. And that's one way that we can show love for others, by taking other people where they're at in their relationship with God, by building up the good that's there and helping them grow in holiness. Not seeing people as our enemies, but as our neighbors, and not noticing every fault, but looking past their faults to see their potential to become great saints. This is really seeing the world as God sees it. Thomas Merton, he spoke about this once. He had been in the monastery at Gethsemane in Kentucky for quite a while, and quite a few years. And one day, he was out running errands for the monastery, and he was in Louisville, and on a street corner, he had a mystical experience. And he describes that experience like this. He said, "I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. And if only everyone could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they're all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of the reality, the person that each one is in the eyes of God. If only they could all see themselves as they really are, if only we could see each other that way all the time, there'd be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed." It seems impossible to see others like this, as our neighbors, really as family. And it might be easier if we had those preternatural gifts that Adam and Eve had before the fall. But God's ready to give us this grace if we ask for it. The Eucharist, it reminds us that he's not holding anything back. He's given us himself in the Eucharist, and if we receive and respond to the graces that he's giving us, we'll be changed. We'll see the world through his eyes, and we'll see everyone as our neighbor, and not just know the law of God intellectually, but we'll all desire to live it by putting it into action.